welcome. I went ahead and muted everybody just for now, but I wanted to let you guys know that that we're going to be opening up the floor to questions in just a little bit. My name is Danica Moore, by the way. I'm a professor of chemistry, so not directly related to the field of psychology, but definitely I teach a lot of psychology students in ancillary ways in the chemistry department. So first off, I wanted to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So we have Anne. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Is it me, Anne, or the other Anne?
I'm so sorry. Anne Pedikin.
Okay.
Correctly?
Yeah, I know. I was a little confused too, other Anne there. Nice to meet you. My name's Anne Hedekin, and I'm the Transfer Center Coordinator at San Diego Mesa College. And I'm like frantically looking through all these pictures, wondering if any of you guys have been in my class, but I also teach Personal Growth 120. And just a little plug for any of you, we're having, CSU UC application workshops 4 days a week if you guys are ready to transfer. And thank you for inviting us here. I'm really excited. So this is a wonderful opportunity for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. So now let's have Claudia, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you for having us. First of all, thank you to all of you who are joining today. I'm a little sad today because my camera is not working this week. I'm hoping to get it fixed soon, but I am really happy to see all of you. My name is Claudia Estrada Howell. I'm the supervisor for the Career Center, Transfer Center, and Evaluations. We are here to help students with many wonderful things. On the career side, we can help you with connecting to a wonderful career counselor. We can help you with helping you build a resume. We also collaborate with work-based learning. So if you have questions about internships and need help or support with that, we could direct you there. I have my email down on the chat, and I'll make sure, I don't know if you all can see it, but I'll make sure that you all can see that. If you have any questions or want to connect with the Career Center after this session, feel free to email me directly, and I am happy to make that connection. But thank you, and I look forward to this event.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. So the two people I just introduced for the students who maybe are just coming in are people who work at Mesa College and who can answer some questions that are directly related to transferring and general kind of career services. So if anybody's interested in those kinds of questions, we might funnel those to Claudia or Anne. Okay, so next up, we'll introduce our panelists. So these are our UCSD graduate students. First up, let's have Zeev.
All right, hello, can everyone hear me? All right, I'm Zeev Marcus. I'm entering my third year as a graduate student at the University of California, San Diego. I work in the Human Behavior and Evolution Lab at UCSD, and there we study evolutionary psychology. It's kind of a hybrid discipline of evolutionary biology, game theory, economic game theory, that is, and a bunch of other subdisciplines that go into understanding human behavior better. And I study specifically the way that people who are higher in prosocial motivation, how those people differ in how they guide their attention before they make important decisions. So we give people information, see how they guide their attention, and I can try to quantify the differences in attention between different sorts of folks. And other than that, I look at large repositories of data to model how there might be connections between things like religiosity and later in life outcomes.
Wonderful, thank you, Zeev. And I believe all of our panelists are also transfer students. Am I correct in saying that? No, just kidding. I know Zeev is. Jamal, were you originally a transfer student?
Yeah, I was a transfer student originally.
Do you want to, I'll give you a segue if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm I'm Jamal Williams. As I just discussed, I was a transfer student. I went to Southwestern College and then transferred to UCSD. And now I am a third-year graduate student in the psychology department, of course. And I focus on memory, how long-term memory affects our capacity for processing information in the short term, like your ability to maintain the words and the sentences and the themes that I'm talking about, that sort of like short-term ability, how it interacts with the knowledge that you've gained decades ago or years past. And in the other lab I'm part of, I'm interested in cross-modal perception, and in particular how auditory information, sensory information can co-opt or demand influence over visual perception. And so I work in these two labs on cross-modal perception and memory more broadly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jamal. And then last but not least, we have Anne Yilmaz. Am I saying that right?
Close enough. I mean, I don't even say it right, so it's okay. So my name is Anne. I am also a third year at UCSD. I work in the Wixted laboratory, and that lab does basic memory science, meaning that we don't do necessarily like applied work or we don't do neuro, but we do a lot of math, which is kind of like the less sexy side of memory science, but I like it plenty. And what's kind of cool is that we do take that basic memory science and apply it to the eyewitness realm. So I do a lot of work with police lineups and things like that. As for why I'm here, even though I'm not a transfer student, I had a kind of unconventional undergraduate experience. I had a lot of sports-related surgeries. I'm fine, but that meant that I wasn't really connected or present during my first couple years of undergrad. So in some ways, I know what it's like to feel like I only have 2 years left at my university to get my hands in things. So that's why I'm present today and still talking to you. But yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. Okay, wonderful. So I just want to go ahead and open up the floor. Ariana is going to be our moderator. Just so that everybody's clear and comfortable, we are recording this meeting. So just by the way, if you have your video on, it could be being recorded. You're welcome to mute the video. You don't have to have the video on. And if people have questions as they come up, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, you can also do that. So myself and then Ariana will also be keeping an eye on that. So all right, Ariana, do you want to kick off our questions here?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first question I have is, at what point in your undergrad experience or previous to that did you make the decision to continue your education and go to graduate school? And how has that decision impacted your life? Do you think it was the right thing to do, or like how did you get there?
So for me, I, like Anne, had a little bit of a unique experience. So immediately out of high school, I started community college. And then things happened and I needed money. And so I had to get a job. And I was in the workforce for about 8 or 9 years before I decided to go back to academia. And so for me, the decision was quite pragmatic. I knew that while I was working, I was taking classes at night and online. And my decision or my goal was really to try and find as quickly as possible something that a career path that spoke to me as an individual, that would allow me to use the skills that I have wisely and in interesting and perhaps unique ways, but then also a field that requires skills that I don't have that I would be interested in acquiring. And so very, very shortly within my first semester, I identified a couple of different career paths, and most of them involved some sort of research experience. And that was pretty intriguing to me. I really liked the idea of getting into research and being at the forefront of knowledge in a particular area. And so very quickly, I decided to get into research. And then once you're kind of in that world, the pipeline is very linear. It necessitates some sort of graduate school. So once I kind of made that decision, it was easy for me to move into the idea of graduate and higher education.
For me, I didn't know that I wanted to go to graduate school until well after I graduated. I didn't even feel comfortable identifying as purely a psych major until so the way that happened, that it worked was I kept taking classes through all of my surgeries just because I needed to maintain a scholarship. And so I had all these credits in psych, and then like, you have to graduate. And I couldn't just keep staying because I was paying out of state tuition. And I was really hoping that I could find something to do with psych because I really liked it, but nothing was really speaking to me. And then it wasn't until my very last quarter at the University of Oregon that there was like one lecture that they briefly mentioned false memory work. And I was like, whoa, this is so interesting. And my school was mainly a clinical psych school. And that was my first time ever experiencing an experimental psychology lecture. And so then I was like, oh, this is like STEM, which is what I like. This is computer programming, which is what I like. I can apply it to eyewitnesses. And I was originally pre-law. And so like, it was like this happy home of everything, but I was graduating in 3 months and I did not even think about graduate school. What had happened was I moved back home to San Diego and I just started emailing professors at labs because I knew that I found my calling, but I had no lab experience, didn't know if I would actually like research. So I was just trying to get my foot in the door to see if I could get some experience, to see if my hunch was correct. And I was lucky that my current advisor let me in as a volunteer. And I volunteered for him for about 6 months at UCSD. And then I shot him an email. I'm like, hey, can we have a meeting? I want to go to grad school and I want to go to grad school and work for you. And like that luckily went over pretty well. He had a good laugh about it, but I didn't know that I wanted to actually pursue graduate school until about a year and a half after I graduated. That's just how long it took.
All right, and for me, it was sort of similar to Jamal, where I was in community college for some time, looking for I needed a specific course to get a better job that I needed, and didn't actually plan on enrolling for more time than that. But I'd also enrolled in a psychology class. It was a physiological psychology class that required some reading, and it was through a lot of reading and that exposure in community college that I at least got interested in research and knew that I wanted to learn more about psychology, and ended up taking more and more classes for about 4 or 5 years. Actually, I was in community college, and then I decided to transfer over to UCSD specifically because of the research program over here, and yeah, I would say in community college, that's really where I made that decision that at least I'm interested in research, and then it's through kind of happenstance and some experiences while I was at UCSD that I kind of continued with that, and some point in between, some gray area in between those things, that I made a decision that, well, I'm not just interested in research, but I want to go to graduate school and really build the skills that I need to do the kind of research I'm interested in.
Thank you guys for sharing that. I think we have some questions in the chat as well. I see a question. It says, I'm debating my major from psych nursing to forensic psychology. What helped you guys decide your majors and decide the path that you wanted to take?
I can go first just because mine's weird and sort of simple. It's, as I said before, lots of surgeries as an undergrad. And so I started off taking more STEM courses, more science courses that were like really heavy on workload, I guess you could say. And then as I was progressing through my health circumstances, I had to stop taking those classes just because I couldn't balance that with like physical therapy and things like that and just real world stuff. And so I kept taking psych classes, which sounds, I'm not putting down psych here, but I was able to balance that with what I was going through. And I kept taking it because I was interested in it, and it incorporates aspects of STEM, which I really liked. It incorporated math, which I liked. On some levels, it incorporated computer programming, which I liked. So it just felt like this happy merriment of everything. But it took some time for me to actually like choose it at the end. But yeah.
If I may, just exploring different courses, sort of related to what Anne was saying, where you're in a circumstance that that kind of influence your taking other sorts of courses. But even within psychology, kind of exploring the breadth of the kind of variation of different psych courses that are there, whether you're interested in clinical or forensic psychology. I mean, you don't really know until you spend some time in those areas, and the cursory research doesn't necessarily give you that, and you might find yourself inspired by methods or something something more mathy than, as Anna mentioned, and you can't know that without kind of taking leaps and going for some new experiences like that. So definitely being open to new things can help you with making those decisions and making informed decisions.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that for me, I put a lot of time into thinking about where I wanted to be, but in the end, like Zeev said, I just tried a bunch of different things, areas that seemed interesting from the outset, and then getting into them, I found out whether it was actually interesting or not. And I ended up sticking primarily with memory. Was the first thing that was so interesting to me within psychology, because it made a lot of the harder things, like reading tough papers and understanding equations really thoroughly, implementing them in programming languages. It made all of that stuff fun, or much less tedious than it otherwise was. So the short answer really was just that I tried to experience a bunch of things and then looked for something that I actually enjoyed doing. I think that's something that is really important, especially if you guys are interested in research, because there's not a lot of payoff often. But we can talk about that later too.
And if I may just build off of his point of like finding something that you're interested in, that does take time and that does take a lot of dabbling. Like when you're taking other classes, whether it be in other disciplines or not, think about whether or not you're eager to learn more, not just if you're having fun learning the content, but if you have like follow-up questions in your brain, because I think a prerequisite to being a graduate student and being in research at least is this general sense of curiosity. So try to examine within yourself what makes you feel curious, right? Because that's a really good sign that you have a space where you can explore and learn new things. But yeah.
And we have a follow-up question in the chat. It says, how did you find these different avenues to be able to try different paths out besides taking new classes? And then what undergraduate classes helped you most in your graduate career related to those paths?
Yeah, so with as far as the avenues to finding these sorts of things, I really had to be proactive. I went to meet with counselors or saw like job postings or events like this, and where somebody would be talking about research opportunities and how to get into them. And I think that at UCSD, it's a lot easier because some research positions are actually advertised. But a lot of the ways that I got into research or into the experiences that I had was just emailing people, just like cold calling. You find their website, or you take a class with them, or you see a class that's interesting, and you just click on their email and send them, something really short but really professional, telling them that you're interested and that you're motivated and that you've got time to give. And a lot of people are not going to respond, but you will definitely get responses. And from those responses, you can learn a lot about somebody, whether that experience is going to be productive for you or not. And yeah, I think it's really important to be proactive and willing to reach out, and understanding that some of those opportunities aren't going to work out, and not to get too discouraged by that, and just to keep trying to find, your place in the world.
Just to piggyback off that a little bit, and to just reemphasize that point that being proactive is huge. And so a passive approach, you might stumble on opportunities. And I definitely had in the past. That's actually how I got my first research opportunity. But definitely more so in my grad school years, I see how a proactive approach can really take you far, at least give you some more experiences and things, because I thought, at least at first, that maybe, as a transfer student, I would need more experience to get involved in a lab, or I would, they're looking for, I don't know, looking for something specific. And the fact is, even as a transfer student, you have a lot, if not all, if not most, of the same kind of background as the students who are in their third year there at UCSD. And the professors who are looking for help around the lab, they're not necessarily expecting that you know all the skills. They know that people are trying to develop skills. They know that there are people coming in there with interest, and that's how you start, is not necessarily coming in with a really storied background and a lot to offer, except for your interest and willingness to learn. So being proactive in that approach, and really kind of, sometimes sending emails that don't get back to you, I mean, that's fine, because it will, it can definitely pay off big, and if anything, can save you time in the end.
So I'm going to say something that's like directly contradictory to Jamal, but I don't want you to take this as like a who's right, who's wrong kind of thing. This has to go towards goodness of fit in terms of culture of a lab. And when you're in something, if you're in a place that's a good personality match, not just a research match. So being proactive, great, definitely do that. That's how I got my position in the lab that I now work in graduate school. But I emailed my potential advisor in all caps. And that is how I got into his job, because I was like, okay, I already graduated from the University of Oregon. This guy doesn't know me. I already don't work for him. The worst thing that's going to happen is I continue to not work for him. And UCSD is full of really, really competitive undergraduates, right? They all had really good grades to get into that place. And I really want him to at least read my email and not just delete it or not just file it away into his inbox. Like, I want him to pay attention to me. And so my subject line, all caps, my first paragraph, all caps, basically let me into your lab. I will do anything. I will do library work for you. I will do menial lab tasks. I'm just really curious. This is what I bring to the table. But most importantly, like what Zeev said, is I don't have your same skill sets, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to pay attention, and I'm willing to try and show up. Right? So it's like work ethic and passion and curiosity. And my advisor, he responded, I don't have anything for you right now, but I like your style. Come in and we'll figure out how to use you. And I think that speaks not to just proactiveness, but just being honest about your skill set. Don't try to pretend to be some hotshot researcher when you're not. Just like be really open to opportunity and do your best to like reach out to people who you think can help you. And if it's a good personality fit, it will hopefully work out. That's all I can say, but just reach out to everyone. And I sent like 50 emails that summer to other labs, but I just was like, hi, I read your most recent paper. Please like let me into your lab. But when I emailed my current advisor, I knew he was a good research fit. And I had this gut feeling that he was a good personality fit too. So I tried extra hard, which to me meant all caps, but you don't have to do it that way. If you're not a kick down the door kind of person, don't do that. But like I am, and my advisor is, so that's good. But yeah, so proactive, maybe kind of professional, just be yourself, truly.
I just wanted to break in here really quickly. I think there was a follow-up question about any classes that you guys had taken as undergraduates that you feel were really helpful, or that you wish that you had taken undergraduates?
I think that you would not be doing a disservice to yourself if you picked up any sort of programming language. That is a hot commodity in graduate school, especially in experimental psych, because a lot of times you have to code your own programs for like the studies that you run. And your research can be slowed down a lot if you have to pay somebody to do it. And also sometimes your lab doesn't have money to pay somebody. And so if you want to spend your time appropriately in grads, or not appropriately, if you want to spend your time more on the data collection side in graduate school, as opposed to learning how to program, maybe picking up those skills as an undergrad would be beneficial. I know that I had potential grad schools call me, like the advisors would call me and ask how good I was at programming. And then also take stats as much as you can. That is definitely not undervalued either. I took 3 different types of stats classes as an undergrad, and still my first year of graduate school, taking graduate stats was a bumpy ride. So I would say stats and programming.
So I would just add to that it depends. It depends on your path. So definitely for experimental psychology, it pays for you to know a little bit of programming, if not for programming the experiment itself, for being like flexible with the sort of analyses you do. but if that's not your forte, you can still be involved in experimental psychology. There's qualitative sort of approaches to experimental psychology. There's different approaches. So getting to know a little bit more about yourself before you take those steps is definitely helpful. But across the board, I think for any STEM or any science, taking statistics is really important for just like general scientific literacy, if not for like things that will be applied and that you're actually doing. So definitely, I think at minimum like a stats course. It also in superficial ways that looks good, that you're that you're interested and have that background, especially if you go beyond just a basic course like that. But I say that more because it's just like that's generally a good idea for any kind of sciences to understand statistics. So really, I would say, and going back to this, that it depends on your interests, and then looking at the sort of courses that align with that, and the sort of professors that are interested in those things, and looking at courses. Sometimes there's really interesting specific stuff, especially at UCSD, depending on what you're looking for, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the types of classes that you take are really going to be dependent on the subfield within psychology that you're most interested in. If you're particularly interested in social psychology, or you're interested in like social justice in the psychological world, taking a full year of neuroscience classes might not be the best for you in that field, but it might be something that's really interesting for you, that expands your knowledge base and gives you a background for asking new and interesting questions. So I think it really depends on what you're most interested in and what you think can help your career the most. I think that Anne and Zeev both really hit the nail on the head with statistics. I think not enough people come into their graduate career with an understanding of statistics and need to spend sometimes a significant amount of time like getting more comfortable with like hard stats and understanding what these models are telling you about your data. And so it can be really helpful if you can come in with hard skills like stats and programming, but it really is going to depend on the subfield that you're most interested in.
I will say, though, is there are people who get admitted to our program who don't have a background or an undergraduate degree in psychology. We have people who graduate in computer science, philosophy, history, and that's going to depend, like Jamal was saying, on the subfield that you're interested in, and also the advisor that you're interviewing with, because maybe your advisor really values that extra perspective that you're bringing, or maybe your advisor doesn't, right? So try to do things that interest you to enrich your own learning, and then with like the idea that you still have to be a competitive applicant, so still programming and stats. But if you want to deviate a little bit from psych, maybe deviate a little bit from psych. That's fine too.
Yeah, totally. And this is going to be like the most tedious answer and just giving you a bunch of homework. But something that I did is, when I was interested in a particular lab, most of the time people's information is available on that website, and it tells you what sort of courses they took. Sometimes it'll have their CV, and you can get an idea of what sort of skills are preferred in that lab. And like Anne said, in the lab that I'm currently in, we have math majors, we have psych majors, we have graphic arts and design majors, we have a couple others, but there are a bunch of people who didn't major in psychology at all and didn't find their interest in research until maybe their last couple years of undergrad, when it was already maybe too late to change, or even after in post-bac, where they got interested in like hands-on research experience. And that can be really meaningful for a lab. I think in the last couple times, Anne's really hit the nail on the head by saying that your advisor fit is super important. So it's not just the case that we have a design major and anybody with a design understanding can get into our lab. It's just that this person was interested in our topics and showed the skills and the drive to really be in the lab that we have. So advisor fit and what's going on with your lab is going to be really important as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess piggybacking off of the types of classes, could you speak a little bit on the rigor of the classes themselves? There is a question in the chat that asks about the transition between college and grad school and the pace of studying and learning. How did that differ?
Graduate school classes at UCSD are pretty easy. So I think that going from Southwestern Community College was hard, but then going to UCSD as an undergrad was like much harder. And then going into psych graduate school, at least in our field at our department, they kind of treat your education, it's more on you than it is on them. They're not really like forcing education down your throat because it doesn't really matter to them necessarily whether you pass. Or that's rude, that's not the case. It's just like they're here as like this font of information and knowledge, and it's your responsibility to take from a class what you get from it. So a lot of the times the classes have less stringent requirements, although that's not necessarily true of like the statistics class at UCSD, which was quite hard and quite intense. But for the most part, most of the classes are, they really put it on you. So it depends on how much you want to get from the class. Some of them are really easy if you're just interested in like a cursory glance of the history of a particular topic. But if you're really interested in it and you think that it's important, meaningful for your research, that could be something that you spend 30 hours a week on like a single class or more, for sure.
Okay, so okay. So for sorry. Okay, can you reiterate the question one more time?
So I think we were.
Oh, the rigor of the class. Distracted by something here. Yeah. So as far as the rigor of the classes, I can't say that the content itself was on a different level, at least coming from community college to the university level. But the one thing that was very obvious to me right away is that the organization of time is something that I would have to be a lot more careful with, just because of the quarter system. At least at UCSD, it's just very quick paced. You have 10 weeks to complete the quarter, and so I don't know if I would call that more rigorous, but it's a little more taxing on your time, and you have to be very responsible with what you're doing with your time. And then definitely at the graduate level, at least in our field, slackens up a bit, because responsibility is kind of on you to pick up the skills that you want to be the sort of researcher, at least in our case, in the experimental case, to be the sort of researcher that you'd like to be. So graduate level is a bit different. And even at the upper division at UCSD, I wouldn't call that harder or more rigorous. It's usually sometimes smaller classes where you might be more involved or asked to present a little bit or discuss things with 10 to 20 other students. So it can be different, but I wouldn't call it any tougher, especially if you've come in prepared from your experiences in community college.
I also didn't find it that shocking going from undergraduate to graduate course load in terms of work requirements. Like Jamal touched on like time and being able to like be like, wow, I don't have to put all of my effort into this one reading assignment for this class because you're not really being graded on one. Like in graduate school, it's less busy work. Like it's not like turn this in, get an A, turn this in, get a B. Wow, good job. It's kind of like you're there to learn, and the classes are in different subjects. I mean, all psych, but like different subsets of psychology. But what they're really trying to train you to do is how to examine things critically, even if they aren't in your field. And also they're trying to train you how to think about problems and how to interpret things that you might not understand in order to find like holes in arguments. And it just kind of, they're trying to build you up as an academic and as a scientist and just how you should interpret data. However, even though you aren't doing as much busy work, I wouldn't say that they were necessarily easier always, because I feel like the psychological toll of classes in graduate school was different because there was more pressure. Not only are you now surrounded only by high achievers, because congratulations, you're in a PhD program, it's you are also on some level aware that your colleagues might be on hiring committees that you might be on in the future, and that your professors, you're probably going to need to ask all of them for a letter of rec within your first 2 years of graduate school because you don't know anybody and you need to apply to grants in order to get money to do research. So you really want to impress them more so than you did as an undergrad, but also you don't really have as much time and it's outside of your like field of specialization. So it's like this weird toss up where it's like the workload is different, but the psychological pressure for me at least was way higher. And then trying to learn how to manage that was kind of tricky, but.
I wanted to interject really quickly that I saw there was a question about finance. I think that's probably an important question to most transfer students. So how did you guys handle the transition, if you transition from a community college to UCSD in terms of finance? And then if you could speak a little bit to how graduate funding works.
I mean, at the undergraduate level, it's, I mean, there are loan opportunities, things like that. That's just sort of standard procedure for what you can do as an undergraduate, and if you're looking for funds in that way. At the graduate level, it's a little bit more flexible in that you have, as mentioned, there are like funding opportunities to fund your research, and that makes it so that you don't have to take other sorts of job opportunities while you're studying. Other than that, if you don't have grant funding, there's also pay for TA work. So being a TA in these classes, they pay for that and a little bit for the research itself that you do. So at the UCSD program, it's fully funded, and that varies from program to program, and it also varies at the master's level. That's less likely to happen, and most of those require like either it requires that you fund it yourself, basically, for the master's.
So for me, during community college, I actually worked a part-time job. And so it was really important for me to have as much funding as possible. And I won a bunch of random scholarships. And so I really can't highlight enough how important it is just to apply to scholarships, as many as you can. The first couple are going to be really hard, but you'll eventually get to a point where it is a skill just like anything else, and you'll be able to do it much more quickly and much more easily than you had your first couple times, especially because you'll have material. So a lot of the stuff from particular scholarships can just be copy and pasted or reformatted for a particular funding source. And so when I got to UCSD, I was fully funded. My school was all paid for, and I was actually able to quit my job because they gave me a stipend to live on. So in undergrad, everything was paid for. So I really recommend looking for scholarships. And then in graduate school, most programs actually pay you to go to school there, most if not all. And this funding can vary wildly. Some of the programs I was looking at would fund you to $18,000 for 9 months, and you had to TA once per quarter. And then other ones would pay you $38,000, and you only had to TA 4 times in 5 years. So the amount of funding that you get and the amount of work that you have to do for that funding varies wildly. I mean, like massively. And how long they'll fund you. So sometimes they only fund you for 9 months, and you need to be prepared for what you're going to do for your summers. And then others fund you for a full year. And that's going to be different by different departments. But the bottom line is that as a grad student in psychology, your education should be paid for, and you should also get some sort of stipend so that you can focus all your time on acquiring and generating knowledge. Sure.
I can't comment too much on the experience from community to a 4-year just because I wasn't a transfer student, but you aren't going in blind when it comes to finances in graduate school. It's when you're going through the application process, most schools have their financial packages and support online. So feel free to look at those and email graduate coordinators. It's their job to help you through things like that. And they typically have those files at the ready. You're not harassing them. And then let's say that you get an extension, like an invite to open house, which is like the next step before being formally admitted. You will have a full like hour or so where they break down all the finances, what your benefits are. So like health insurance, what your stipend is, how many times you need a TA. And I know that we keep saying, oh, like TAing, like that's a stipulation for some graduate schools for funding. TAing can be anywhere from like 25 hours a week to slightly more. So that is essentially a part-time job, which is why it matters if you're TAing once a quarter or either 4 times in 5 years. So, and also like factoring cost of living, like when I was doing graduate school tours, you will be hosted for like a full day just by graduate students. And so you'll get an opportunity to ask them about what it's actually like living on their stipend, and if they feel overworked for money, or if they feel like they can live somewhat comfortably. So you don't need to make that decision blindly. Don't feel pressured by that, because that will be explained to you throughout that process for graduate school.
And just to add to Anne's point, on those interviews, they will tell you. So part of getting into grad school is doing an interview, and you will meet with the grad students, ask them the questions that you are uncomfortable to ask in front of the advisor or through somebody else. The grad students will tell you. They have no reason to lie to you. They want you to come to that university as informed as possible. They don't want you making mistakes they didn't make. So make sure that you feel comfortable asking those questions over email or in person, because you will get the opportunity. And I mean, me, Anne, and Zeev have all been part of these, and they're like really honest, frank discussions about the pros and cons of attending the university that we're at.
Yeah, and it's not just attending the university, it's the advisor, whether or not that lab that you're applying to has money. Like, you can ask about every single source of income that you can think of, and feel free to, because we will help you. We are a community, right? When you're going to grad school, this isn't just a solo endeavor, even though it feels very isolating. Like, you are joining a family of graduate students for your department, and feel free to ask them whatever. And you'll usually be living with them for like 2 nights or something. So you'll have a lot of time to pick their brain about things.
Yeah, and most of the time they either asked those questions or wish they had asked those questions. So you definitely shouldn't hesitate to ask grad students those questions. They were there just a year or two ago.
And going back to research, there is a question asking how and if COVID has impacted your research. And I would like to add to that and ask if it has impacted your funding as well.
Oh, okay, I'll go. It personally has not impacted my funding. I was still able to pick up a fellowship, which is one type of support, which the distinction between like fellowships and grants doesn't really matter. I was still able to pick that up. However, I know some people personally who had sources of funding revoked because of COVID. So that is a reality. I personally, since I run web-based experiments, I don't have to run people in person as participants in my studies. My research hasn't been impacted significantly. However, if I'm being really honest, like, my mental health has, like, just the little things day to day when I'm working and trying to solve problems, I can't just walk down the hall and ask somebody for help. And that impacts my research, because my research process is a lot slower now, because I am, whether or not it's true, I feel a lot more on my own and self-reliant in terms of looking things up and solving it, instead of just walking down the hall, getting a quick answer and making progress. So it's definitely slowed down my research, but I haven't been stalled completely.
Yeah, so like Anne, a good proportion of my work is done online. So we just generate experiments, just like websites, and have people interact with them that way. And so in that respect, data collection hasn't really been impacted. I'm able to collect data and analyze that data like I would before. But as we've kind of been talking about with like finding the right advisor and finding the right lab and finding the right city, what is going to be really important for your success in grad school is the fit, the ideological fit, the personality fit with your advisor and with the people in your lab. And my lab has a really strong sense of community. All of us work in the lab from like sun up to sundown. And that was something that was really important for me. Like Anne was saying, it was important for me to interact with people that were sharing the same struggle and that understood how tough this stuff is, and just to have a laugh with and like go get a coffee or work on hard problems together, or like the simplest crazy things like in programming. Wait, should I do this first or that first? That wouldn't even cross your mind before are now day-long endeavors of trying to find the right answer or the right papers or the right people. And so my research hasn't necessarily been affected by the pandemic. I've transitioned to writing a lot more as opposed to running experiments. But the biggest detriment for me is not being around my lab. So research-wise, it's been fine, but mental health-wise, it's been pretty challenging. Research isn't always in and of itself very rewarding. And when those rewards do come, they can sometimes be a long time after the hard work. So it can be really nice to have a good support network. And I'm lucky enough to have one of those here at home, but yeah, it sucks to not have the lab for sure.
And for COVID impacts for me, it put all my previous work to a standstill because I was mostly running subjects in person. But in a way that's pushed me into learning some new skills of getting some different sorts of studies online. Other than that, that's kind of a basic thing that a lot of researchers are doing right now. What you can do online, do online. Another approach has been to look for existing data and do some exploratory, like new novel analyses on existing data. So that's sort of what I mentioned at the outset with my introduction. Is some of my work has to do with large existing data sets, particularly like right now with some out of the Pew Research Center, and there are a bunch of these online out there, and that's a different approach to doing research, is an exploratory approach to research. So that's one way to go about doing things. There's the online approach, and some of my other work has to do with collaborations with labs, and the engineering side of things, and that would involve eventually running people in person. But for now, there's still progress in meeting and designing things and planning for when hopefully we can run people in person, hopefully soon. So there is still progress, even with the stuff that could only be done in person. But it's generally slowed things down a little bit, and in some ways forced us into thinking about novel approaches to things. So it's not so bad.
Thank you. And the next question I see is asking if you can speak on your experience with the hierarchy in research. Have you experienced it, and do you believe it's different in psychology than it is in other science fields?
Yeah, so my first experience was in a very biologically focused neuro lab. So we did surgeries, we did single unit recordings on neurons, and the hierarchy there is substantially more strict than it is in the research that I've engaged in at UCSD. The UCSD psych department is not really like that, and the advisor that I have, he's not really like that either. It's more just like we're all there interested in similar topics, and so we should all be exchanging these ideas and exploring different experiments and arguments and papers together. So the lab that I'm in now is on a much more equitable footing than in more bio-focused labs. And some of that is just like the culture that's like sometimes impossible to get away from. Bio labs have been hierarchical for a long time. Some of that comes down to the funding, and some of that comes down to the responsibility. The PI's name needs to be on a lot of paperwork, and they need to make sure that people below them are following particular guidelines because they need to vouch for them. And I'm certainly not trying to say that it's right. I think that it can be really detrimental to the growth of the people under labs that work like that. But there are historical reasons, perhaps, for why bio labs are like that, and where cognitive science labs are more egalitarian, I suppose. But yeah, it's going to vary by lab, and substantially by discipline as well.
I guess this is one of those things that I think is cultural fit, and that you can inquire about when you do grad school visits, and also when you meet your advisor during the application process. Personally, I don't feel like I'm talked down to. I don't feel like my advisor has a sense of superiority. We don't mind sharing authorship. We've never had that kind of argument. We kind of have this, if you contribute, you're an author, like kind of done deal sort of thing. And I haven't had any sort of experience within my own lab or with my advisor, but my advisor is also wonderful. But like when I'm in other graduate classes, sometimes I feel that from other professors, honestly. I get talked down to a lot, especially in my first year when you're kind of unsure if you actually belong, because everyone's really smart and everyone's hyper specialized. So when you talk to them about their own research, you feel really dumb. But of course you do, because everyone studies different things. And I remember that like I asked one of my professors like what a certain word meant, because he kept using it over and over, and I thought it was important because it was. And he straight up asked me how I got into graduate school. And I like looked at him and I said, sheer luck and determination. And he liked that answer, luckily, and he laughed, and he's like, oh, like good, she's funny, she can take a joke, but it's, you still sometimes feel that if that is a constant thing. Our department doesn't really have it a lot that I can personally feel, but it does come up every now and then. And I do have friends in the department who have switched labs because they felt very small in their lab, and they felt like they didn't have a voice, and they felt like they were made to feel inferior a lot. So I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. I'm going to say it has to do with cultural fit. And you can definitely ask other grad students about what that specific advisor is like, because for all my friends who switched out of their labs, if you ask the other grad students in their department about that advisor, they will all tell you that that advisor is like that, and whether or not you're able to be in that situation, or if you want to be in that situation.
Yeah, I'll be mostly echoing the same sorts of ideas, but at least my experience at UCSD, not too much of a general hierarchy like you might find in biolabs and things like that. That will vary lab to lab, and I've had either experience of feeling talked down to and also feeling equal with with someone who's technically a higher up. But it's also important to keep in mind that it can be project specific. I mean, there's sometimes grant situations where it's like, well, there is a hierarchy here because someone is allotted or someone is supposed to be taking or having this much, some amount, maybe more responsibility for a particular project than you. And so there could be some toe-stepping in a project specific way, but it's generally, I don't, especially if you do your research and you explore and you find that good fit for you, you should be able to avoid situations where you feel that way. And for some people, maybe they thrive with someone who's a little more on top of them in that way. So I think rightness of fit isn't singular. It's not the same for everyone, but it's only important to be mindful of your needs and the kind of person that you want to work with, and to look for that and not settle for a situation where you feel you feel talked down to or anything like that. And that's about all. But there are situations where it makes sense that that someone might feel that that you're stepping on their territory, so to speak, especially if they are supposed to be lead of a specific project.
I will say that, like, a good question to ask potential advisors is, what is your ideal relationship with your graduate student, right? Like, ask them, in their head, are they telling you what research to run, or are they expecting you to generate ideas on your own? That's a very important question. And if you want to generate research on your own, being told what to research can feel very oppressive. But I would say a more common thing, at least in our department, is that graduate students feel neglected by advisors. Like, it isn't so much a problem of being felt like they have no mobility or aren't able to speak, or that it's super stratified and hierarchical. I would think that sometimes graduate students feel more like they're on their own, at least in our field, and they don't really know of the tools or community that they have to, like, assist them in generating new ideas or tackling problems. I think that's a more common problem. I personally don't have that problem, but that's what I would have to say about it.
If I can just chime in too really quickly, I think as somebody who went to grad school as well, that there's a certain amount of imposter syndrome that we all have going into any institution. So I think it's important to do as much as you can to explore your peers and communicate with them, because you'd be surprised at how everyone tends to be feeling that same kind of uncomfortable, I don't belong kind of feeling. So I don't think that's very uncommon. I think it's probably the rule, not the exception.
Would you mind just explaining what imposter syndrome is? Somebody asked that.
Gotcha. Imposter syndrome. So basically, we all kind of feel at some point in our life like we don't belong somewhere, right? Especially, depending on your background, if the people in your area reflect you and your values, whether or not your gender is represented, I think came up in the chat there, whether or not your ethnicity, your cultural values. If you're an international student, I think the culture becomes really important. So there's a lot of barriers just to feeling like you're supposed to be where you are. And I think that that can be really isolating for any student, whether they're a graduate or undergraduate student. But it's not, you're not alone in that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So.
For the next question, oh, where did it go? It says, well, you mentioned there's not a lot of payoff in research. Could you explain that and your experience with that?
Yeah, what I mean by that is, so a lot of times when you're an undergrad, you have a task to complete, and then somebody evaluates your work and tells you whether it was good or bad or to what degree it met the requirements for that assignment. That is wholly not the case in graduate school, and even for some classes. So there's like a lot of ambiguity in the work that you do. And I think Anne talked about it before, like we're all high achievers. We all want to do good work. And so sometimes you'll finish a programming script or finish an experiment or finish a presentation and really want to know, like, is this A+ work, or like, was that good? Like you just don't get any sort of like emotional payoff, or like, yes, job done, job finished, that feels good. I feel like that was a good job. A lot of times because you are the critic, and at almost every time you feel like you could have done more. I mean, that's probably often not true, but you always feel like, yeah, that was good, but I know I could have done more because I just binged, you know, The Last Airbender for the last 2 days, and I really didn't need to be doing that or something. So what I mean by there not being a lot of immediate payoff is just that your work kind of needs to be its own reward. And Zeev hit on it before, like you don't, oh, I totally lost my train of thought. It's gone.
I can jump in here. So like right now I made a breakthrough on something I've been working on for like 8 months, right? And it was one step in an equation I'm working on. 8 months, I finally made one step further. And this was after I worked for 6 months on it for a qual. That was after I defended it, which makes you sound like, wow, I finished it. It's like, just kidding. Let's revive it. Let's criticize it. Let's scrap it, rewrite it. Let's build on it. Let's submit it. Oh, it got rejected. Let's work on it again. Let's add another experiment. Oh, submit it, rejected, or run a follow-up experiment. So then you're back to coding, then you're back to writing, then you're like, it's just that things take so long and you're being heavily critiqued at every single stage. And so that like pat on the back, whether that's like saying like, congrats, you got an A, or whether it's like, wow, you did good work today. You just don't get that in graduate school because this is expected of you. This is the process. And so it's like, it's really hard to feel really stoked about something when you've been working on it for 8 months, and you'll continue to probably work on it for another 12 months. And that's just the way it is. And you might have like 5 or 6 different projects at the same time. And your friends who are in graduate school, your friends who aren't in graduate school will ask you, how's that paper? You're like, which paper? And then you realize they're talking about one that was from 2 years ago that you forgot about, that you have to make edits to, and you're like, wow, I should go back to that. And it's just like this constant stream of work piling up, and you don't really ever finish it. And even when it's published, people criticize it. Like some people might go, wow, amazing job. And then the onslaught of like the people that you've been contradicting who are really well established, they're going to fight you on it. And that's what builds good science. It's this argument from science critiquing each other and trying to build like prove their case with math. And when you're a graduate student, you're not the smartest person, and you feel that. And so it's really, really hard to kind of get that rewarding experience sometimes. And you have to just be okay with trial and error as being rewarding, and just seeing these little victories along the way. But seeing those little victories as victories is something you need to learn. That doesn't just happen automatically.
Yeah, I feel like academia almost trains us to only respond to evaluation, and the criticisms that we get along the way as graduate students is supposed to help us, as is evaluation, but it's just a different approach. But it's just not padded with that, with the sort of thing that gives you that good feeling, that payoff that we're talking about afterwards. And so, yeah, I think I think that's why, going back to the beginning of our conversations here, really getting to know yourself and getting to know what are the things that you enjoy doing will, and then this is getting into cliche territory, but that's how you make it so that you find your own payoffs. Those little payoffs are easier to find when you enjoy what you're doing. If you don't like programming and you're slaving away at programming, that might not be the best job for you. But if getting debugging something and finally getting it right gives you that aha, and you don't need the evaluation from someone else, I mean, that's something important. And why not chase that feeling, especially if it's something that helps you to be productive. So going back to rightness of fit and understanding what you want and all of that, that's one way of, I think, surviving the epidemic of evaluation that we have, because it's just not at this level. It's just not what we get, and it's for good reason. It's to push us forward. But you can hopefully find places where just doing the work is at least a little bit of a positive motivation in and of itself.
And also something that people,
finding a bug in your code is like getting a hit of heroin. I mean, that is insanely great. Fixing a bug in your code that you've been debugging for days or hours or months is probably the greatest payoff that I will ever receive, just to add on to Zeev's point.
and also something that people don't really talk about, or it's like super shush, is experiments fail, right? Like sometimes you'll be spending months and money and time into something and you don't find results. And you have to accept that in stride, and that isn't a failure on your part. That's the way that science is. But when you're a graduate student and you feel this time pressure of, I need to graduate in 5 years, 6 years, whatever it may be, that feels like you wasted a lot of time, and it makes grad school feel like there's not a lot of payoff sometimes, because your little like research baby just kind of, you had to let it go and you had to move on to something else, and you have to kind of just keep looking forward. But that can make graduate school a little bit tough too.
Yeah, so like one of my first conversations with a grad student once in my first year at UCSD, I was like pretty sad. It was December, and I was like, I tried 3 different research projects with 3 different like broad reaching ideas, and none of them work. And I'm so disappointed. I was like really dejected. And he's just like, you can remember how many failed? Like, you're not a real grad student until you can't remember how many you failed. And he was totally just joking, but failure is just part of the job. My advisor has like hundreds of projects that never worked. He has twice that many that worked that can't be published because they're not definitive enough, or they don't say something enough strongly. So not getting the publishing payoff, or not getting like direct, quote unquote benefits from the job can be really hard. And I think Anne's point is super, super important. Your effort in research is not going to be linear with your success. So you can work really, really, really hard and still not necessarily have the success of somebody who you share an office with. And it's really hard sometimes to get over that, like I said, I mean, it's not a linear payoff like it is in undergrad. You work hard, you'll probably get an A. It's very, very likely that you'll get an A if you do everything and you put the hours in. And that's not necessarily true with research. So if you guys do get into research, like, don't let that sort of stuff discourage you too early, and try to talk to the other grad students if you can about that, because they will go on for hours about failure and talk about every project that has ever failed. And if you want to talk to me about that, I'll talk to you about it. That's totally fair.
I just want to go ahead and wrap up our loose ends here. I think we could probably all talk for another hour, but since our time is up, I just want to reiterate that we have Claudia, who's in here, who's from the Career Center. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can contact her. I apologize, I didn't introduce Pavel, who's I'm sorry, Pavel, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly before we take off?
Sure, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Pavel Consuegra, and I am the Internship Coordinator. So if you're looking for any hands-on opportunity on the field, more than happy to support you. I drop my email on the chat box, but you can just chat, look for Mesa Internship, and voila, my information will be there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pavel. Sorry, I glossed over you at the beginning. But yeah, so there's some really wonderful opportunities. And I thank you so much to the panelists. I think that your information was absolutely invaluable here. And thank you so much to Psi Beta for helping us moderate and coming up with some amazing questions. And thank you to all of our participants here. Letty, I don't know if you want to mention this will be uploaded to some website, I believe. The
Yeah,
recording.
thank you, Danica. Hello, everyone. I'm Leticia Lopez. I'm the HSI Program Manager at Mesa College, and we will be uploading these recorded sessions to our HSI website. That's Hispanic Serving Institution. And thank you to Professor Moore and our psychology faculty for promoting this event as part of one of many events that we've promoted for Latinx Heritage Month. So the website I'll post here on the group chat, but also send it out to you, to our faculty to share with students. So thank you again for joining us.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your evening.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.